Hello, everyone. Welcome to this year's virtual edition of Stat at JPM. Will 2022 bring biotech renewal? Sponsored by Icon. Thanks for joining us. I'm Matthew Herper, senior writer for medicine here at Stat, and I'm looking forward to this afternoon's two-part agenda. First, I'll be talking with Alnylam's new CEO, Yvonne Greenstreet, for a look at what's next for that company. And immediately following, a group of my Stat reporters will join me on this virtual stage to talk about all things JP Morgan. At the bottom of your screen, you should see several icons. Use the chat feature to chat amongst yourselves or to send a message directly to the Stat team. Please do not put your questions in the chat, but we do want your questions. I mean, seriously, start putting them in there now. If you do have a question that you would like to ask us, please use the Q&A feature to type your question and we'll answer it live. In the Q&A window, you should also be able to see the questions that other attendees have asked and upvote those questions. We'll pay attention to the upvotes. We'll be taking questions throughout. Please don't wait until the end to submit. This is part of what makes these events fun. Thanks again for being here. Before we get started, I'd like to welcome Salman Babani, Senior Vice President for Drug Development and Therapeutic Expertise at Icon, for a sponsored introduction of today's event. Please note these remarks have been pre-recorded.
Hi, my name is Saul Babani, Senior Vice President and General Partner at Icon. Thank you to the entire Stat team for inviting me to deliver these opening remarks. Having worked on both the biotech and CRO sides of drug development for the last 25 years, I'm excited to join such a relevant discussion about the state of biotech as 2022 presents new challenges for our industry. As I was preparing for today, I started thinking about all the drug development happenings beyond those related to COVID-19 vaccines and treatments. Of course, it's impossible to speak about the current state of the industry without addressing the impact of the pandemic. In addition to the acceleration of virtual and decentralized trials, we've also seen new challenges arise, including an overstretched labor force, reallocation of staff and resources, and supply chain disruptions, all of which are impacting the speed and cost across all stages of drug development. But we've also seen a tremendous amount of growth. Since 2016, the biopharma industry has grown by 7.2%, with the global biotech market size expected to reach $2.44 trillion by 2028. In 2020, venture capital funding for emerging biotech companies reached an all-time high of $29.8 billion, and that investment continued throughout 2021, with emerging biotech attracting $23 billion in funding within the first 3 quarters of the year. 2021 also saw 93 biotech IPOs raise approximately $13.8 billion within just the first 3 quarters. We're also continuing to see more CROs grow and consolidate, and with that, some apprehension from our biotech sponsors. Many of these companies need the services a larger CRO offers, but prefer a partner they can trust from both the bottom up and top down. One of the biggest challenges for the biotechs I work with is knowing how to raise funds, find a co-development partner, or when to divest their asset. Raising money through venture capital or other angel investors can be extremely challenging for emerging companies and executives, especially those without a proven track record. So, how can we better support these emerging companies that are looking to bring life-changing treatments to the market? As we look to the future of drug development, effective, meaningful partnerships built on trust and transparency should be a priority. Assigning a senior leader or executive that can provide senior-level oversight and become the go-to person for each sponsor can help make an otherwise large CRO feel more intimate and personalized to the smaller emerging biotech companies. Customization will also be key. Being able to provide a variety of services and solutions across a global landscape is critical. But even more important is the ability to help pick and choose the right solutions for each sponsor's unique needs. And of course, funding and partnership opportunities will also be essential. CROs can support emerging sponsors by helping to analyze their data, as well as develop presentation materials to better promote their asset more effectively to their investors. They can also play matchmaker, leveraging their existing relationships to help emerging biotech companies find the right financial partner. I know everyone is busy and ready to dive into the presentations ahead of us, so I'll hand it back to the STAT team to kick things off for the editorial portion of today's program. Thank you again.
Thank you, Solomon. Here to join me for part one of today's event, please welcome Yvonne Greenstreet, CEO of Alnylam Pharmaceuticals. Hello, Yvonne.
Hello.
So just to give everyone some perspective here, Alnylam was founded in 2002 to commercialize what was a really out there technology at the time. We'd all been taught in biology textbooks the central dogma of biology, which is DNA makes RNA, makes proteins. And here was this new thing called RNA silencing, which meant that actually DNA was making another kind of RNA that messed up the first RNA and kept you from making proteins. And now this company was going to make drugs out of it. So it's been a 20-year odyssey. Now the company's work has led to approved products on Patro for ATTR amyloidosis, Givlaari for hepatic porphyria, Oxlumo for primary hyperoxaluria type 1, and Leqvio, which is sold by Novartis and is for hypercholesterolemia. Alnylam has a market capitalization of about 18 billion. Yesterday reported full year sales of 662 million, up 83%. And now for the first time in that history, the company has a new CEO, which would be you, Yvonne. So welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Matt. And you're absolutely right. We're at such an exciting juncture in Alnylam's history.
So let's start out by talking about where things are going. I mean, there are a lot of questions out there, I think, and please, all of you out there, toss them into that Q&A tab. I see a lot of people out there, but I don't see a lot of questions yet. But let's talk about where this technology could go, because most of your current near-term pipeline is in rare disease. But when it comes to, there's a potential to use RNAi for, well, Leqvio is already cardiovascular disease, but also for central nervous system disease. And you even talked about during your presentation, kind of combining siRNAs for kind of a super cardiovascular treatment that controls blood pressure and cholesterol and other risk factors. How do you see this going over the next several years? I mean, what is the potential of this technology?
Well, I think I'll start off by saying that actually it's not surprising that when you develop a new modality, you start off in rarer diseases, and then as you de-risk that modality, you start to begin to think about addressing larger diseases. And I think one of the aspects of the RNAi technology that I think makes the opportunity for more prevalent diseases so exciting is the potency, the durability, leading to less frequent administration, better outcomes for a number of diseases, potentially including hypertension, NASH, diabetes, amongst others, and really emboldened by the data that has been generated for Leqvio, you touched on, for hypercholesterolemia. We feel that now is absolutely the right time to be starting to shift our focus to addressing some of these much more prevalent diseases, and in doing so, impact the health of potentially millions of patients around the world. So we think it's a very exciting next chapter for Alnylam.
And there are a lot of new technologies that kind of have this ambition. I mean, there was news around a lot of news around gene editing at this JP Morgan, but where there are already people talking about taking that and moving into more common diseases like cardiovascular. Why do you think RNAi is the technology to be doing this with? And are there any lessons for those other technologies that you think they should be taking from what Alnylam's done?
Well, I think we have a unique profile to offer here in terms of potentially annual administration, reversible therapies, and obviously don't have the same access issues that you would have with gene editing, the more one and done therapies. Take our opportunity for addressing the issues in hypertension. That's a program called zilebesiran. which is an RNAi therapeutic for hypertension, as well as being able to reduce blood pressure. We've been able to demonstrate tonic control of blood pressure, which is incredibly important for delivering better outcomes, as well as infrequent administration, twice a year. And we think that that sort of approach for managing hypertension allows us to think about how we address health at a population level. And this is a really exciting next step for Alnylam. And we've started our phase 2 studies with this program, our Cardio 1 and Cardio 2 studies, and we're looking forward to the results from the first of these studies at the end of this year. So we're well on our way in bringing forward what we think is going to be a medicine that has hypertension, which, as you know, Matt, is the number one cause of CV morbidity and mortality, and actually now is considered very much a public health crisis. So we think this is going to be a very, very important medicine value at Alnylam as well.
So this business is a difficult one, and you kind of got a sight of that when you first joined Alnylam, which was, I think, about 5 years ago. You just became CEO, but you've been with the company for some time. Tell me about that experience, and thinking of the Revusiran experience, which was an earlier drug that you were developing. What was that like? Take me back to that moment.
Yeah, so the first week I joined Alnylam, there's a program ongoing called Revusiran, and we identified some mortality imbalances in the study. And within 24 hours, Matt, of seeing those data, we decided that we had to put the study on hold. And coming from larger companies where it may have taken a little bit longer to think through those decisions, I was absolutely blown away by the sense of urgency at Alnylam, the focus on patients, and really the willingness to make whatever decision we needed to make in the interest of patients. And from a personal perspective, that really reaffirmed my commitment to the company. This truly is a company that puts patients first and foremost in everything that we do.
So I think the question you've probably gotten the most this JP Morgan, it really is kind of go time in a lot of ways for you this year. I tried to count up the number of catalysts you had in your presentation and meant to have that number. It was something like 18. So a very busy year, but there was just a readout from a competitor or another program in this disease, and it's leading some investors to worry about about your studies that are coming along for amyloidosis of the heart. So, and the endpoint you're using is a 6-minute walk test, which is just how far people can walk in 6 minutes. Why isn't there read-through from the BridgeBio experience for the data you guys are expecting over the next year?
Yeah, well, we're not privy, of course, to all the details of the BridgeBio study for a program called acoramidis, but it seems to us as though there were issues around how the 6-minute walk test was conducted. Something very strange about that result, where the 2 other endpoints that were shared from the study, the KCCQ, which is a quality of life assessment, as well as NT-proBNP, which is a marker of cardiac stress, they did show benefits for acoramidis. So we think there's something that's slightly unusual about that 6-minute walk test result. I mean, when we think about our studies, we're very confident about the design and execution of our Apollo B study, which uses the same endpoint, 6-minute walk test at 12 months. We've got kind of over 10 years of experience in designing and conducting studies in the TTR space, and we've thought very carefully about the diagnostic criteria, the patients that we've enrolled, importantly, how we have conducted the study with respect to the 6-minute walk test, very carefully oversight, very careful training of the sites, together with a broad population that we've enrolled in the study. And together with, I think, the wide range of evidence that we've delivered demonstrating the potential benefits of patisiran in patients with cardiomyopathy from a wide range of different sources. So we're very confident about the Apollo B study that's ongoing, and we're looking forward to the results in the middle of this year.
Now, do you expect any secondary endpoints, like hard cardiovascular endpoints? Do you expect to be able to see anything on those from the study?
Well, the study's powered around the 6-minute walk test at 12 months, but we do have other endpoints in the study, including mortality and cardiovascular hospitalizations. And we may get some trends that show benefits with respect to those outcomes as well. But we're confident about the results that we're going to see around the primary endpoint. The study over-enrolled at 360 patients. We targeted 20% hereditary ATTR patients, and the remainder being wild-type patients. We had, as I said, a very rigorous approach to how we conducted the study. And so, we're looking forward to seeing the data in the middle of this year. I feel very confident.
So some interesting audience questions. This one's from Mark Monane. He writes, blocking a bad protein through silencing has had some great success. What about promoting production of a good protein that perhaps is in lower than optimal concentration through RNA technology?
Yeah, no, that's actually a very interesting question. I mean, clearly our technology is, aimed at knocking down proteins, and this has given us the opportunity to study a very wide range of diseases, starting off at primarily liver-targeted diseases. But one other area that I'm very excited about is extending beyond the liver into other tissue types, particularly the CNS. That's another very exciting area.
Explain for us, why is the brain a good target here? I mean, we spend so much time thinking about the blood-brain barrier and how hard it is to get into the brain. Why is it a target that you think could be one for siRNA?
Well, I think the important point to make to start off with is just the unmet medical need that there is. CNS diseases, Alzheimer's, ALS, Parkinson's, many other diseases. And what our scientists have been able to discover is a conjugate that we're calling C16 that's given intrathecally that is able to affect wide biodistribution in the brain and knock down proteins in the brain. And having this delivery mechanism has enabled us to think about addressing CNS diseases. And the first program that we're progressing is a program we called ALN-APP, targeting amyloid precursor protein, which we believe will allow us to address the needs of patients with Alzheimer's disease, which, as I'm sure would concur, is a very important medical need. And the reason why we're particularly excited about ALN-APP is that it's got a differentiated mechanism of action compared to some of the antibodies that have been studied, where this program acts upstream of amyloid precursor protein, upstream of where antibodies currently target, and has the potential to act both intracellularly and extracellularly in reducing disease-causing peptides. This is a program that we expect to have clinical data from by the end of this year. And if that's successful, Matt, I think the other reason why we're so excited about this is that it begins to open up the whole CNS set of opportunities for us. And we're very much looking forward to being able to do that going forward.
I mean, it could certainly tell us a lot about amyloid either way. What kind of clinical data are you expecting? What will people be able to learn from the study that you're currently doing?
So obviously, safety and tolerability are key in a study like this, but we'll also be looking at a range of biomarkers in the CNS, APP, alpha and beta. We'll be able to look at neuroimaging studies, a range of other biomarkers. And so we'll be able to have a good perspective, when we get the results of the study about likely efficacy in this disease.
So another question from the audience, shifting gears again, from Vithyanandan. What about siRNA for oncology?
Yeah, that's a very interesting area for us, and we're thinking about the potential for siRNAs in oncology, particularly hepatocellular cancer, because we're able to affect delivery to the liver, and that might be a cancer which might be amenable to an RNAi therapeutic approach.
Okay. And a third audience question from Lincoln Weed, asking about missed and delayed diagnoses and the obstacles you treat. This is a big problem for some of these rare diseases. I mean, how many of these, particularly I think for amyloidosis? So in terms of finding the patients, I mean, how many people have these disorders and don't know it?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely spot on. Physician awareness, patient diagnosis, very important aspect of, being able to impact the outcomes of patients with rare diseases. We've successfully built a very robust commercial and medical affairs organization who have been able to develop sets of capabilities in terms of engaging with physicians, using data and digital capabilities. And we've done a really good job actually driving awareness and treatment of the conditions for the medicines that we've brought to market. I think one of the other areas that we've demonstrated innovation as a company has been instituting what we call value-based agreements. And this has allowed us to work with payers in the US and in other markets to ensure that there are no headwinds for patients getting access to our therapies.
Tell me a little more about that. I mean, how do you do that in a way that obviously you're still making money on these drugs and charging pretty significant sums for them? How do you think about threading that needle between making sure that there's access and making sure that there's a return?
I think the first thing to say is that the medicines that we've developed at Alnylam are really transformative medicines. These are not medicines that provide incremental benefits to patients. They provide substantial benefits to patients that have an impact on outcomes for patients and therefore the healthcare system. And we work very closely with payers to educate them on the diseases that we're working on and the profiles of the medicines that we're delivering. And then we're able to agree constructs where essentially we get paid for performance of the medicines.
So I just wanted to ask more broadly, I mean, this is your first JP Morgan as a CEO, obviously being virtual. This is weird. But what's your feeling about where things are for biotech now? I think, I think it was just the last JP Morgan when we were really hoping that the mRNA vaccines would kind of change the conversation around pharma at large. Now there is a lot of talk about drug pricing. There's all this balance around discussion about M&A and really not great stock performance generally last year, not talking about you particularly, but the broader biotech market. What's your temperature of where things are now?
Well, I think one point that's worth making is I really do think that this is the time for RNA. I think the mRNA vaccines have really validated the mRNA approach. And I think the work that we have done, I think, has shown how important RNAi is going to be in addressing a wide range of diseases. So I think this really is the decade of RNAi. I think you're right about the broader biotech environment. If we think about IPOs in 2021, most of those are actually trading below their IPO price. And so I think small cap biotechs will continue to face a challenging equity market. I think that's probably a second theme. I think a third area to watch is what happens with pricing, with a build back, better I think that's likely to pass. And that'll impact drug price negotiation, particularly for drugs that have a high cost to the federal government and have been on the market for several years. Actually, I think it puts a company like Alnylam in a very good position where we plan to grow through continued and sustained innovation in the way that I've just described, and not through price increases, and also implementing some of the approaches that we've just discussed, the value-based agreements, etc. So I think we feel that we have a very strong position going into what might be a changing pricing environment in biopharma.
All right. Thank you so much for being here, Yvonne. This was great. I think we're about out of time, but I look forward to seeing what the year brings for you guys and talking again soon. Thanks so much.
That's really kind, Matt. Thank you so much. Take care then.
Before we get to the next part of today's event, I want to make a quick announcement about something new and exciting that STAT's been working on. And by STAT, I actually mean me and Adam and Kate, who will be up here in a minute. For the past year, we've been partnering with a computational journalism company called Applied Excel to develop a new clinical trials intelligence platform. We're officially launching this platform called Stat Trials Plus on January 19th. The platform uses machine learning and editorial algorithms developed by Applied Excel and trained by Stat's biotech team to analyze thousands of daily changes across clinicaltrials.gov, PubMed, and press releases in order to curate the most crucial updates for you. It allows users to identify emerging research activity in novel diseases, perhaps foresee disruptions in company pipelines, and detect roadblocks improving an intervention's efficacy. These insights are delivered via smart alerts, interactive dashboards, and timelines. The goal is to save you time searching through data so you can spend more time on analysis and decision-making. After this event, you'll receive an email from us with a little more information about Stat Trials Pulse and a link to schedule a demo if you're interested. If you have any questions at all, you can email me at matthew.herper@statnews.com. And now on to part two. I'd like to welcome the team. Please welcome Adam Feuerstein, Senior Writer for Biotech at Stat, Damien Garde, National Biotech Reporter at Stat, Megan Multaney, Science Writer at Stat, and Kate Sheridan, who's taking on a new role as Stat's first ever research reporter. Welcome, everybody.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
We have breaking news, Matt.
You have breaking news. Okay.
Well,
go ahead.
The Biogen NCD decision has come out. Damien, you want to quickly read Rachel's story and kind of give this is a little bit weird for folks. Apologize for this, but literally news is breaking while we're all here talking.
Right. We have stopped the presses. So just by brief way of background, I think for people who followed the Biogen Aduhelm situation, the company has been waiting this all important decision by Medicare as to how and how much it would cover the Alzheimer's treatment Aduhelm, which has been controversial for reasons we can get into, but I'm sure everybody knows.
Come on. I want to know.
yeah, quickly. Okay, so the decision they made is what is called a coverage with evidence development, which, without getting into the jargon of it, is not exactly the worst, but the next worst outcome that perhaps Biogen could have wanted. Essentially, Medicare is saying they will only pay for this medicine when it's being used in a CMS identified trial or NIH sponsored trial that corresponds with this long list of things that it has to do, which basically means it has to be done in a large academic medical center. A lot of people had thought perhaps they would make a decision like this, but it would be more open such that the drug would be more widely available or covered in more instances. But instead it is, I think the rapid reaction, we have 10 minutes of people knowing about this, is that this is pretty restrictive. The other thing to note, and then I will
Biogen shares are down.
Okay, yeah. I was just going to say,
Biogen shares are down 8% on this decision. Lilly, which also has an Alzheimer's drug, amyloid-directed antibody, which is down 3%, because this covers all monoclonal antibodies, amyloid-based.
And one of the big questions I immediately have is, what's a clinical what clinical trials this includes. Is it only going to be certain randomized trials, or could you open up a big observational study that everybody can get in, right? So
there, I can cop to only reading the decision summary. It is a roughly 100 something page document. I would say the study requirements would seem to preclude a sort of just opening an observational study and calling it a clinical trial by virtue of getting
the old
reimbursement.
Schering-Plough Remicade trick, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
The other thing to note, though, is that this is a draft decision with a final one expected in April. And as actually Biogen pointed out yesterday at JP Morgan, drafts can change. They use the example of CAR T cancer therapy, in which the initial decision was far more restrictive than the final one ended up being, based on feedback from all sorts of people. So in the next few months, we will hear a lot of public testimony and things submitted to CMS, either in support of or against this ruling.
Yeah, and our colleagues, Rachel Kors and Nick Plorko, are covering this decision. There are DC correspondents. They're more expert at this and sort of the nuances of what this 100+ page decision or draft decision says. So I would just say follow those guys. I know that they're working hard. There's a story up on Stats front page, and there will definitely be more to come on this breaking news.
Rachel even had like a very prescient breakdown of what this very particular thing was, which I was reading over the last panel a little bit, which I thought was kind of very convenient and very enlightening.
Yeah, I would just say thank God for Rachel, because there's
intricacies
to this thing that like they're really, I mean, she's great, and there are ways to interpret this and everything that those guys got it.
Yeah, it's interesting that Lilly is seeing so little impact too. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Just guys, Damien and Adam in particular, while we're talking about this, you also watched Biogen's presentation, which seemed a little bit awkward from your very straight coverage. How would you put this in the context of that? The company just had to go in front of investors. They have another call planned for tomorrow. We all knew that this was probably coming. Putting this in a JP Morgan light, how does what they said the other day look now?
Well, I mean, interestingly, Biogen is literally getting the decision at the same time we all are. And they actually mentioned that on their JP Morgan presentation, that, they didn't get any advance notice. So they literally probably clicked the link at the same time that everyone else clicked the link. So we haven't heard from Biogen yet about this. Matt, like you said, we will hear from them tomorrow. I think what will be interesting to hear from them is, again, like what they expected and how this impacts the rollout and patient access and, all the complexities around having to get these clinical trials up and running. And clearly that's not ideal for them. But at the same time, maybe somewhat expected. So, I'm sure that they've got contingency plans for like kind of all levels of decision here. And so tomorrow, I assume in more detail, we will hear from them about kind of how they're going to deal with this.
Okay, well, we're going to move on a bit. If any of you have more questions about this, we're all here. Feel free to pop them into the Q&A. We'd be interested in hearing about them. And we're going to move on to some other topics. And again, really ask us anything. But Megan and I wrote some stories over the weekend because there was some news about gene editing. We had really the first example of in vivo gene editing from Intellia back in June. And then probably the two most eye-catching deals of JP Morgan were a deal that Mammoth Biosciences did with Bayer and Pfizer and Beam. So Megan, is this a validation for this technology? Where do you put this in the overall story?
I mean, we've seen pharmaceutical deals happening before. Like we have CRISPR, Vertex, Intellia, Novartis. Even if we go beyond CRISPR, we have Sanofi with Sangamo. They're already all in clinical trials for sickle cell. So I think I mean, for me, what I found really interesting is that, in particular, for the Mammoth deal, where this is not that much money, it's 40 million, but it's kind of the second one of these deals of this size that we've seen just in the past few months. They also had a 40 million upfront from Vertex, or I think it was in November or December, and we haven't even seen preclinical data from Mammoth. That was kind of the first we heard that they even had therapeutic ambitions. And so I think, that one pretty spectacular. That seems a little bit, that was the bigger news to me, was that that was their coming out party. But I don't know if that's kind of my initial.
It's not bad to get 40 million bucks for your coming out party. I mean, I can't really fault them there, but yeah, I remember, I think we both had long conversations with them about why they were focusing on diagnostics. So that was a little bit interesting. I mean, let's put this for everyone here. I mean, we've all covered this at different points. We go through these hype cycles, and I mean, remember, Adam, it was gene therapy a few years ago, and now it seems like a lot of those gene therapies haven't really panned out in the way I think we all thought they did. Or CAR T is another example. Where do you folks think that the gene editing after this JP Morgan is sitting?
I mean, I've seen charts of the hype cycle of, like, what is it, the mountain of exuberance and trough of despair, or whatever the terms are. Not that they're necessarily doomed to repeat what we saw with whether it was gene therapy or mRNA in a previous life, or genome editing 1.0, which in some ways has kind of come back to earth, at least in terms of sentiment, if not scientifically. But it can't be a bad thing. Like, if you look at companies like Beam Therapeutics, one, they always need money. And so if someone's offering it to you, you're probably wise to accept it. And two, you can do a lot worse than getting what is perceived as validation from a company like Pfizer. So I feel like in a real term, nothing's changed. It remains a sort of wait and see. It's exciting, but we'll find out just how excited to be. But then in the sort of like macro phenomenal, what's the point of JP Morgan? I guess it's to create hype and make people conscious of things. Then everybody has succeeded, at least for this week.
What was particularly interesting about that Beam deal, Damien, is I've been trying to follow and figure out, like, there's always biobucks in these deals, right? The Beam deal stood out to me, though, when I was looking at everything kind of all in a row, because the Beam deal was only like 75% biobucks, whereas everybody else is like 95%. It seemed like an outlier in that there actually seemed to be more money than usual being paid to the company for what they're doing. So that seems validating. I don't know, Matt, you have more experience looking at these than I do, but certainly at least for this year.
It was also it was like $100 billion a target or something like insane like that.
It was a lot.
It was a lot. Like, I initially thought it was a disappointing number, because I thought it was a big collaboration of everything. It was like, no, it's like four targets. So,
yeah.
And Megan, this is a little bit more validation, not validation necessarily, but like more move towards in vivo genome editing, right?
Yeah, talking about the Beam deal in particular.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. And our conversations with the Pfizer, hearing about what Pfizer's side of things was really interesting, where they've invested a ton in these LNP technologies, and they've got all this capacity, and they are looking for other types of mRNA to shove in those little envelopes. And
it's like the year of LNP, like and lipid nanoparticles. So we don't use the acronym that people don't know, but maybe explain a little bit about what that technology does.
Well, and how do you deliver gene editing, Megan, through an mRNA in a soap bubble, basically? Why does this work?
Sure. So, taking the COVID vaccines, which we're all now very familiar with, that piece of mRNA codes for a little bit of spike protein, and you use some chemical and electrical magic, not magic, but science, and you coax that into kind of a bubble of lipid nanoparticles, which because they are very similar to types of fats already in our body, they get taken up by certain kinds of cells. And you can engineer LNPs to be taken up by different kinds of cells, although primarily they go to the liver right now. That's kind of where the state of the science is. But if you want to put CRISPR into someone's body, the mRNA just codes for the enzyme, the CRISPR enzyme, and then the guide RNA that tells that enzyme where to cut. So it's a little bit of a bigger package. It's a little bit, that can prove a little bit trickier, but it's certainly possible.
And Matt, if we're talking about thematic or themes here, I think, a lot of this stuff we just talked about, and if I would also include maybe the Amgen Arrakis deal that was announced this morning, and there was the Bristol Century Therapeutics deal. These are all deals where you got a big pharma or big biotech kind of buying into, early stage, interesting, really cool science, early, preclinical or early stage biotech drug development technologies. And, that's kind of, it seems to be an emerging, we see that happen obviously throughout the year, and it happened, but that's kind of, in terms of news flow and deals that we've seen so far at JP Morgan, that stands out to me.
Well, nothing was traditional, right? Like nothing was, we bought a small molecule that you use, that's an immunomodulator or relieves pain or lowers blood pressure or something like that. Everything was kind of, hey, we're buying crazy science. Look at us. So, any other big trends anyone took away from JP Morgan? Kate?
A lot of RNA and a lot of Pfizer. It seemed a lot of Pfizer research collabs and a lot of RNA based stuff.
Suddenly, when you're making that much money on mRNA vaccines, suddenly I think you may have a lot to prove to convince investors some of that sales volume is going to stick around. So,
maybe one of the other trends is what didn't happen, right? Damien, is looks of no big M&A.
No, none. Which, I've seen charts that prognostication for big buyouts at JP Morgan vastly outnumbers the actual number that get announced. I think there's like a survivorship bias. Like we remember, was it Bristol Celgene was a JP Morgan story, but most years there is nothing even remotely on the level of that. But magical thinking abounds in this business, and it didn't work out. One thing that is sort of similar on both things, I was curious about how people would talk about the future of mRNA, because it has become this like household acronym and has made in excess of $100 billion maybe total globally, and is on pace to get even more. And so I was particularly interested in how Moderna would phrase it, how BioNTech would phrase it, and a few others. And Moderna is very much doubling down on vaccines, and they have this plan that I've heard some pushback from, but basically the COVID vaccine obviously works. They would then couple it with an extra mRNA that would encode for whatever the annual dominant flu strain was. And then that would be your annual booster to protect you against both. Eventually they would add RSV and eventually another common coronavirus, and basically just build this like omnibus mRNA product that, according to Stéphane Bancel, governments around the world would be tripping over themselves to buy and to make available for their populations, which, he didn't put it in crass terms, but basically seemed like a perpetual motion machine of profit from mRNA. That may or may not work for 1,000 different reasons. BioNTech is looking maybe more tractably at the flu, but I thought the most interesting comment on the future of mRNA came this morning from Sanofi, whose head of vaccines, the incredibly named Thomas Triomphe, said basically that generation of mRNA, the ones that we know and love from COVID-19 vaccines, is doomed to fail in influenza, basically because the reactogenicity profile that we are willing to deal with, because there's a deadly global pandemic outside, we, or just people, would not be willing to deal with when it comes to getting an annual flu shot. And so granted, he has a vested interest to say that Sanofi makes the dominant flu vaccine right now, and he has a vested interest in saying the next generation of mRNA will be better because they spent $3 billion on Translate Bio last year, which is a next generation mRNA company, and plan to have their own mRNA flu vaccine that is theoretically more tolerable. But I thought it was kind of interesting to see, global multinational French company throw cold water on.
You know what I really enjoyed about that, Damien? Which I knew about because I read your item in the newsletter that it went out while we were on this call. But Pfizer's talking about doing an mRNA shingles vaccine because they say it'll be more tolerable than the existing shingles vaccine, which is a very reactogenic vaccine. But so the way people are talking about the side effects of things we haven't seen through clinical trials is fascinating. And we have a great question that makes me really glad Kate's here. This is from Mark Hong. The XBI is down approximately 30% over the last year, while huge amounts of money are being deployed in the private biotech sector, chasing fewer and fewer companies as so many have gone public, some of them via SPACs. Do the panelists think that there is a valuation disconnect between the private and public markets? And do you think that for M&A, this makes publicly traded firms the more favored targets? It's like a math problem.
It is. I don't profess to be a professional investor, and I don't profess to be a statistician, nor do I profess to be really an expert when it comes to valuations. But I feel like anyone with two eyes can kind of see that maybe there's a valuation disconnect between the private markets and the public markets. I'm thinking in particular of the fact that we do apparently see that the step-ups going from private rounds to public rounds seem to be a little bit more significant than usual, which that feels true. Certainly just based on what we've all been seeing. Whether publicly traded firms are favored as targets, I don't know if that follows, just because they have higher valuations, almost potentially higher than is warranted valuations, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, before this call, I had an interview with Bristol's CEO, Giovanni Caforio, and they presented yesterday, but I talked to him today, and I did ask him. I said, like, what do you think about valuations? Obviously you always ask these pharma CEOs about M&A and business development, and they always kind of give you the same answer. Well, we're very excited about it, and blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
But he did say that he thought that the high valuations over the last couple of years has been a deterrent on some deals. Like, they do, as much as they sort of follow the science, and he stressed that a lot of times when they do deals, I mean, they're following these companies for a very long time. They might have relationships with them, partnerships, and they're tracking the science, and that's kind of the main determinant of what they're going to do. But he says that valuations, I mean, it is important for them not to overpay, to the extent that they can not do that. And so he did say that is a factor. So as much as valuations have come down a little bit now, and on the public side, maybe that will trigger more M&A. I mean, it's not like he's like telling me what deals they're going to do this year, but like, he did sort of give an indication that if that's a check on deal flow, that brake may be released, if valuations stay low.
Well, the other thing that gives me pause from saying, oh, well, it's obviously going to be private biotechs that get acquired because the public biotechs valuations are out of control, is because biotechs have been going public so early. Like you just said, Adam, like companies will follow a potential acquisition target for a while, which these days seems to mean that they're going to follow them through an IPO. Like companies are going public earlier and earlier. And so if you're, I don't know that a privately held biotech company, certainly not one that was like VC backed, that's like a very traditional startup like the ones that we see all the time, I don't know that they would have like enough evidence, I guess, for a company to be interested in acquiring them by the time they go public. It's enough for investors, certainly. Like the story and the potential seems to be enough. I just wonder if maybe pharma's a little bit more.
I actually did. I asked him how if like being public or being private matters to them. I mean, he said that like they're just agnostic, right? They don't really care. He says obviously sometimes the larger deals would be a public deal because those companies tend to be a little bit more expensive, but like they don't care.
Freenome, Roche just put a huge chunk of change into Freenome, which is a closely held company. So there's also that kind of old big pharma. We invest in the small startup and we keep a stake and it gets bigger. And then if we really like them, we buy the rest. But an interesting follow-up question that came in at the same time from Bernard Fallon. What do you see as the catalyst for large deal M&A to pick up again? The IPOs are down, so their valuation should be more attractive. Large companies definitely have patent cliffs. What's going to get us the really big deal that all the bankers want?
Well, you would think that confluence of factors would tip you toward that biotech companies are losing valuation, pharma companies have patent cliffs, and many of them are incredibly cash rich by virtue of what they did during the pandemic. But it's always predicated on this notion that because a biotech company or just whatever, an acquisition target is cheaper than it was, that they believe that price is even remotely like connected to reality. So you could say, oh, they've gone down this much, even at an X premium, they could be bought for this much. You're assuming that that company and its board thinks that they won't recover next year, that they don't look around the corner and think either biotech itself is going to shoot back up or their potential is whatever. So just because it makes sense on paper doesn't necessarily mean that the human beings involved will see it that way. So I don't know, I'm always a little bit skeptical when the math adds up to a run of acquisitions, because I just feel like it fails to account for like ego and hubris and belief and all the things that decisions are often made based upon.
Can I break in for a second? I'm sorry.
Sure.
Biogen has released a statement about the NCD, and I won't read the whole thing, but they say that this decision, quote, will exclude almost all patients who may benefit. This will significantly limit patient access to an FDA-approved treatment, especially for underserved patients, as evidenced in other CED determinations. So they are not happy, as you might expect. But it's also interesting, as we talked about, sort of the sort of how bad is this? I mean, clearly Biogen is sort of signaling that this is a pretty bad decision for them.
Well, and not to take us back to Biogen, but one thing I was thinking, looking at the CAR-T example, or just other times where a company has been trying to kind of scoot a regulatory agency toward its way of thinking, the best thing they can marshal is usually third-party support from physicians, from patients, from other groups who can speak on their behalf. Biogen, unfortunately, has spent the better part of the last 4 years alienating each and every one of those stakeholders. I mean, if now in this context, the price cut, which is only about a month ago, is really the only kind of carrot that they put forward. And I know it won, I think it was Us Against Alzheimer's, came out and said nice things about Biogen in public, but the rest of the sort of like academic class is kind of united against this. Major medical centers, as Nick Florco reported last week, I think, are almost unified in their desire to not prescribe this. And many of them said that the cost or whatever Medicare does was not germane to their decision making, because they simply don't believe that it works. So the evidence hasn't changed. Medicare has changed and the price has changed, but like, I don't know.
It's, it also, the longer, if Medicare can kick the can down the road, the longer you wait, the closer the readout of the Lilly study gets, which is a similar drug in a somewhat, what should be a clearer study design and should answer a lot of these questions one way or another. I wonder how that could play in too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what CMS was thinking, but it does feel like some of the subtext of this is kicking the can down the road. They take pains to say that the phase 3 evidence Biogen has presented is not convincing. And this decision does cover all amyloid targeting antibodies, but they clearly leave the door open to reconsider it once somebody provides some data that they actually like. So it's almost as if they're plugging their ears on the FDA approval of Aduhelm until there's a molecule that they're more willing to consider seriously.
All right.
Bad.
We're running close to time. Is there anything else anybody here wanted to highlight as important at JP Morgan?
It kind of made me want to go back.
Yeah? Well, see, this was my next question for you, Adam. How interesting was this on the scale of JP Morgan's?
I memean, look, let's be perfectly honest. It wasn't the most scintillating JP Morgan I've experienced in my long career. And it was, I think that's exacerbated by the virtual nature of it. You're just not there. But we've had worse and we've had better. So maybe it's somewhere in the middle.
I'm trying to figure out when it was worse, personally, but maybe that's there being no.
Hey, there's still 2 more days.
It's true. Maybe we'll wake up to huge news tomorrow.
I'm personally
the one thing about the virtual. I'm sorry, Megan. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that personally, I'm really interested to see that Illumina unveiled its own long-read DNA sequencing technology.
Mm-hmm.
I call it Chemistry X right now, but this is the similar. I think it will be, intended to be a competitor to PacBio, which obviously Illumina tried to acquire. It feels like a million years ago. It's only like 2018.
2018. I just
that deal got killed.
Yeah.
But I mean, in so many conversations I have with scientists, like the combination of long read and short read is just like opening up all these sorts of interesting insights. And so having another option out there, I think is going to be, we'll see how quickly that starts to make an impact, but certainly I think at the bench, it's an exciting development.
So where would you put this in the long read versus short? There are basically two long read technologies out there. There's Oxford Nanopore and PacBio, and they've kind of been in a bit of a dueling match the past few years. And there's been some cool, some research has announced they finally finished the human genome. I think that was this past year, using those technologies, mostly PacBio, I think. Where do you, does Illumina have to be as good as either of those, since everybody kind of has to use Illumina for short read anyway?
Well, I think where they're maybe going to have an advantage is if they can, just through their size and footprint, like bring down the cost a little bit, because like PacBio can still be, that can still be difficult for some folks to get a hand on. I mean, I'll be very curious to see if they do try to move into the the handheld device space. Obviously, there's existing versions of that, or if they just stick with their benchtop, because that's more in flow with their existing product lines. But I don't know. It's a good question. I'm not sure yet, but I'm imagining they're probably going to try to be competitive on cost more than anything else.
There's also that news is part of just the sort of parade of unfortunate outcomes for SoftBank, the very well-funded and very daring-do Japanese investment firm, which made a huge investment in PacBio, I think 1 year ago or so, at what was then its peak valuation. You guys mentioned that Illumina was going to buy it, I think, for like $3 a share. I think the PacBio investment was around 40. And today's news that Illumina is creeping into their territory sent them down even more. So who knows what will happen in the long term. But if you were to just pull up the numbers on it, it looks bad.
As often happens with SoftBank, PacBio had an amazing year, both stock-wise and advance-wise, like the moment they bought. They picked like the absolute peak.
Damien, in the long term, we all get COVID.
That's true. It's a warm ending.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that I haven't tested positive with it going around my house feels like I'm the kid at the dodgeball that is somehow not getting hit, even though I'm just standing there. Okay, well, we're about done. We have one final question from the audience, which was, I mean, there's a cool one here, which one is better, Beam and Pfizer versus Bayer and Mammoth? But I just think like, how can we tell now? They both have another $1 billion downstream in payments. So, but Adam, what was your most scintillating JP Morgan and why?
I'm going to say, for like drama and excitement, and this is back in the age before social media, I would say that the Sam Waxel clone scandal blow up when Sam had to get up in front of this huge room of investors and explain, well, he hadn't gone to jail yet, but he would eventually go to jail, but explain like what happened and why their drug initially got rejected. And I will never forget that moment. And I was in the room when that happened, and that was and it was a different era, right? Because there, like I said, there was no social media, and so news just didn't travel as quickly as it does now, and that was pretty unreal.
I remember your story from that.
I mean, I was there writing literally like typing as fast as I could, sending it to my editor, and and just trying to get stories up, and it was crazy.
I don't know if it was scintillating, but I remember JP Morgan 2017. It was during the conference that I think still president-elect, well, yeah, I guess so, inauguration day is the 20th. Donald Trump said that the drug industry was getting away with murder, which sent stocks down. And so it was like early in the morning in San Francisco, and I got a call from stat people in Boston saying, we need you to get reaction quotes from from these murderers so that we can put them in whatever coverage. And so I had to like Billy Eichner around the floor, pulling people aside. And I found Len Schleifer, the CEO of Regeneron, and I asked him some version of like, how do you feel about this? But he had no idea what I was talking about. So I broke the news to Len Schleifer that he and his industry had just been described as murderers by the incoming president of the United States. That was an interesting morning.
Which then is even more interesting because we all know about Trump and the Regeneron.
Yeah, wow, from murderer to savior. That's his autobiography title.
Yeah, there's a narrative right there. I think all my favorite JP Morgans were meetings I had on the morning of the last day, or randomly on the street on the Hill. I remember running into Alexis Borisy literally on the Hill, and we were both late to our next meeting, or met Bob Nelson for the first time, I think the day after his party, and I went and met him at his hotel. So I guess I don't miss the meetings at all. Okay, we got a thank you from Bernard. Thank you for all your questions, Bernard. Sorry, Judy and Shratya, that we're not getting to yours, but we are at time. And thanks to everyone for joining. This has been fun. I'll see you guys later.
Thanks, guys.